Hey guys, I'm back to read Polaris again, and today's chapter is chapter 11, The Wind at Their Backs. In the past, with the full crew divided up into 4-hour watches and then divided up again into 2-hour dog watches, they ate in shifts at the little table in the galley. Cutlery, cups, maybe even a rag for a napkin. Now, the new crew ate with their hands in the bright openness of the sunlit deck. Aaron had been a friend and occasional assistant to the ship's cook, and he had no trouble boiling the salt pork in a little kettle that they'd found stowed in the former goathouse. The kettle was meant for heating tar than boiling food, but with the meat of this quality, there wasn't a huge difference. Not that any of them complained. Each crew member received a slab of the stuff, salted to near oblivion, in order to prevent it from spoiling during the trip. To go with it, they each got a dry, flat biscuit, and to wash down this dry, salty feast, a few gulps of water from the scuttlebutt. Most of them took their time. Meals were often only true breaks in a sailor's day. They savored the chance to rest. If not the meal, a few of them ate quickly, though, too hungry from a long day with no food. Owen had always had a big appetite. Looking around, he saw that Thatcher had him beat. The hood rat had already gobbled down his hunk of salted meat and was licking his lips for any scraps. Ravenous as a wolf, he thought. As Thatcher rubbed his hands on his grimy pants, he raised his eyes and caught Owen sizing him up. Owen wasn't the sort to look away quickly to pretend he hadn't happened, and so for a moment they held each other's gaze. Thatcher lifted his chin toward the spot where the barrel of salt pork was resting near the mainmast. Owen shook his head. No, they might eat like savages sprawled out on the deck, but there would be no seconds. Thatcher gave him a sour smirk and looked away. Owen made a mental note to stow the food away after they finished. He glanced up at the raised forecastle. In larger ships, the forecastle was where the crew slept, but it was far too low for that on the Polaris. Instead, it served as a convenient place to store ropes and sailcloth and anything else that might need quickly. It would keep the food out of the sun and out of sight. You better save some of that for me, Aaron called up from the wheel. Owen looked back at him and then right back at Thatcher. You were on the same dog watch as Aaron, were you not? Thatcher looked up and gave a smile and nods. Then go relieve him, said Owen. It's your trick. But I haven't finished yet, said Thatcher, holding up a small scrap of sea bread as proof. And he hasn't started, Owen shot back. Thatcher made a show of getting up, moving in a slow, pained way. As he did, he leaned over and muttered something to Henry. The gusty wind died down once more, and Owen heard the words. Who died and made him captain? The words hit Owen in the gut, stirring up a swirl of anger and sorrow. He shot them both a look. Henry looked down immediately, but this time Thatcher, who refused to look away, he smiled back. What? He said, his voice dripping with fake innocence. Owen played out the exchange in his head. He wants me to repeat it, to say what I heard. He glared back at Thatcher. I won't do it. I won't defame my captain's memory. Watch yourself, hood rat, he said. Thatcher's smile fell away and his expression darkened. I think we should all watch ourselves now, he said, his tone ice, the cold despite the burning sun. Is that a threat? Said Owen. It's a fact, said Thatcher, as he turned on his heel and headed for the wheel. Owen looked around at the others as if to say, You all heard that, right? But no one said anything until Aaron flopped down on the deck with his food a few moments later. Henry turned to him immediately and pointed over at Emma Maria. They're girls, he said. Aaron's mouth fell open, and a little spray of sea bread crumbs drained onto his lap. His surprise was so immediate and genuine that everyone except Owen laughed. I'm Maria, and I'm Emma, they said, introducing themselves to their old friend for the first time. Emma's hair was down now, too, and Owen saw it fly out behind her in a quick gust of wind. As it did, the ship rose up abruptly and slammed down with a heavy crash. Owen looked up toward the bow and saw white spray clearing the railing on both sides. He shouted back over his shoulder, Ease her as she pitches, Thatcher. The wind is picking up, and the waves with it. The others chattered about the sister secret and laughed at the Spanish style and their own gullibility. Owen fell back into his own thoughts. Henry claimed to have known all along and was roundly hooted it down. Owen ignored the noise and looked up into the sails. The wind is definitely stronger now, he thought. It had been no more than a steady breeze that morning, and they had set everything sail they had to catch every puff of it. But now the wind was no longer in such short supply, and the gusts were driving them forward hard. He tried to tune out the chatter all around him and listen. Another gust, and he'd heard the wood of the mainmast groan from somewhere up high. He squinted up skyward into the topsail, but before he could find the source of the sound, another groan from the foremast drew his attention. As he looked up, he relied on his other senses as well. He sat heavily on his haunches, feeling the ship rushing forward beneath him, smashing down the waves as it went. Small, he thought, but growing. He gazed up toward the bow and waited for the Polaris to crest a larger wave. He didn't have to wait long. As the big boat crashed down, he felt the impact shoot up his spine and ring his skull like a bell. He gulped down his last bit of dry mouthful of sea bread and looked around. This time it was Emma who met his gaze. "Think we should reef some of the sails?" she said. That was exactly what he had been wondering. Shortening some of the sails would reduce the amount of wind they'd hauled and be easier on the ship. It was a prudent thing to do. The others hated the idea immediately. "Are you joking?" said Henry. "This wind is wonderful. The faster we get to port, the better." Owen ignored his words utterly. He was no sailor. "Nothing more than some afternoon gusts," said Maria with a shrug. Owen tried to ignore that too. But what did she know of the weather? "The ship has been through much worse," said Aaron evenly. "Yes, much worse," agreed Owen. "But not at full sail." Aaron glanced up nervously. "A few gusts, nothing more," repeated Maria before pushing further, "and we're lucky to have them." She paused. "We are still near the equator, no?" "Yes," admitted Owen. He knew where she was going with this and decided to get there first, and still prone to the doldrums. The hot windless stretches, known as the doldrums, had plagued them on the voyage out, leaving them drifting helplessly for days at a time. Owen remembered the frustration etched on the faces of the captain and crew. A speedy trip ruined, the sea seeming to turn to syrup beneath them. He paused too long in the memory, and the others redoubled their protests. "We have a good wind at our back," said Henry. "The most logical approach is to take advantage of it." Owen didn't care for the boy's seamanship, but he was being completely honest. He was somewhat intimidated by Henry's scientific education. "Logical," he nodded. "I wish to get to port as soon as possible," said Aaron. "Even if a few puffs earlier would be welcome." Emma looked around at the others. "We all want to reach port," she said. "The ship is in an awful place now, but sailing it alone will not be easy, and we have to be smart and maybe cautious too." She turned to face Owen. "Tell us what you think we should do, and I'll abide by it." The others either nodded or mumbled their agreement. Owen took a deep breath and another look up into the tightly stretched sails. It was up to him now. A stray thought flitted across his mind, and a sparrow flashing across the cloudy sky. The old crew had never liked him much. The captain's nephew. Wouldn't it be nice if the new one did? He tried to bat the thought away and concentrate on the ship. The Polaris rocked beneath them. The wind whistled through the sails, and the wooden mast groaned out their opinion on the matter. Owen heard them, but they were a good thick mast and as wide as trees at their base, and they had been well greased and maintained. He looked at the sky, not a dark cloud in sight. With the words of the others still fresh in his mind, "A few afternoon gusts, a good wind at our backs," he spoke. "Full sail," he said. Henry, Maria, and Aaron cheered. He went on. "The wind is fickle in these waters. We'll keep a close eye on it, but I fear that before long we'll be complaining of too little wind rather than too much." The crew finished their last bites of food and rose to their feet as one, finding the deck a bit more wobbly beneath them than it had been when they sat down. It was a fine speech, but as they headed back to work, Emma took a few steps closer to Owen. "Are you sure?" she said. Owen angled his steps away from her. Still slightly unsettled by the idea of girls on board, he frowned. "Fairly sure," he said, even though it was overstating it. "With all the sails set, one big gust ends, and we'll take some in," he said. "If you say so," she said, and then she brightened. "We are making good time, no doubt." Owen smiled too, remembering the old sailor he'd picked up that no doubt from. Her English had been the most non-existent when she first joined the crew, but it had been acquired in such close quarters with so many for so long that it was still dotted with the sayings of many of those men. But it was his innocent phrase, all her own, that knocked the smile from his face. "If you are sure of our course," she continued, "we could reach port ahead of schedule. Imagine that, ahead of schedule, despite all this foul luck." "If you're sure of our course," he looked back at Thatcher at the wheel and then dipped his hand into his vest pocket. So far from shore, He'd replaced the borrowed spyglass with the captain's compass. He turned it over in his hand now and felt its weight. I wonder if they're actually on course how they're supposed to be. We will find out in chapter 12 tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.